I'm a management consultant. I've been consulting with organizations for over 35 years. I have been working with them to help them better perform in executing the journey from where they are to where they want to be. And I am the author of The Living Organization, which is a shift in the paradigm of the fundamental principles of what an organization actually is. When we are looking at how we go from where we are to where we want to be, this journey is a journey of manifesting or creating outcomes. Usually somebody's vision or desire of some future state. And when you think about how we create outcomes, especially as a human being, we look at the activity we do, the relationships we have, and what we call the underlying context. So the context is what gives meaning and direction to our lives. It's how we make decisions and choices. So when we are choosing what we want to do or how we behave in relationship with others, especially our customers and even internally, that context, that set of underlying beliefs have a lot to do with how we create outcomes. And the reason I call it creating outcomes by magic is because when we learn to leverage and utilize and reframe context to align with our strategy, that energy defines the activity so it almost happens by itself or gives the appearance that it's happening by itself. And that feels like magic. A lot of my principles are based on the fact that everything is energy. And so if we look at life through that lens, we see certain aspects of how life manifests in a different way. And if you look at, for example, relationships, and we look at relationships as two energy fields, two people who have certain frequencies of how they are together, right? When relationships are positive, you can think of it as two waves in phase, as the physicists would call it. Well, when two waves are in phase, they amplify each other, so you get a lot more energy. When there is conflict, it's like two waves out of phase, so instead of getting an amplification, you get a diminishment, and so you get a lot less energy. So understanding the nature of relationships through energy fields or waves, it helps us as leaders understand what we have to do to increase the amount of energy we apply to the creation of outcomes. The living organization, and the reason I use that term first is it's in contrast to the typical way we think of an organization, which is very mechanistic. Secondly, so it gives us an idea of contrast. Secondly, it also recognizes that an organization is not a problem to be solved as you would an engineering solution or the design of a machine, but it's a dynamic human social system. And as a dynamic human social system, it's alive. And the other aspect of it is I have recognized that when people come together for a common purpose, that combination of people actually give birth to a new living entity. And that new living entity is a company or an organization or a team. Or as my wife and I like to say, our marriage is the coming together of two separate entities giving birth to the third entity, which is our relationship. And when we focus on the well-being of the relationship, it tends to shift the power dynamics because both of us are, as individuals, committed to the health of our relationship. So when employees, as individuals, are committed to the welfare of this living entity, this person, it resolves the tension between the individual and the collective. And now everybody's working towards the same common end. And as individuals, we get rewarded by focusing on the success of the collective. Our success and the collective success becomes one. And so I needed some idea to transform the way we think, to shift the paradigm. And so I started by challenging the machine paradigm, calling it a living organization. So in a traditional standard organization, think of it as a designer of a machine. We call that leadership. And the machine is designed to take inputs and produce outputs. And inside that machine is a set of process flows. So the leader and the employees in that machine paradigm have a relationship of designer, fixer, problem solver, and component parts to do what the machine is supposed to do. Very mechanistic. In the living organization, it's the nurturing and care and development of the collective, which is the nurturing and care of the individuals as a byproduct to caring for the collective. And so it now goes from transaction-oriented to relationship-oriented. It goes from optimizing and streamlining processes to developing and cultivating the capability and maturity of the collective. Very different approaches. Well, it came as a process, but the seed of it came when I was at a conference, and a friend of mine was asking me what I did. And I was telling her I'm a consultant. I help organizations execute strategy. And then she said, what's different? And I said, oh, that's a good question. I think it's about the fact that I look at an organization as a living entity, that I see that as having a soul, a purpose. It was a set of relationships. And that's what made me different than other consultants. And she turned to me and said, you should write a book. 6 years later, I published the book, The Living Organizations. But it was that journey through the writing of the book. Initially, the book was called The Soul of the Corporation. But as I was writing it, that's when it transformed into, well, no, it goes beyond just the soul. This is recognizing a major shift in the paradigm. This is a living organization. Voila. One of the things that I've discovered during this journey of both writing the book and afterwards is the appreciation of what I call a paradigm. If you look at what's happened over decades, Peter Senge's book, the learning, the fifth discipline, where the learning systems model came about. You've got other such what I call wisdom. Jim Collins' book of Good to Great, and Daniel Pink's books, and even going back to Greenleaf and Tom Peters. All of these wisdom of our ages, you would think that companies would operate differently. And so that's when I began to realize something else is happening underneath it, a paradigm, a worldview. Remember I said earlier that how we think and respond to life is based on our context. Well, the context of business is it is a machine to be optimized, to be designed by leadership and optimized, and people are component parts. Where's the learning in that? How can a machine become a learning enterprise? It can't. It's just a machine. And so all of these wonderful principles, including conscious capitalism and holacracy, which is all about self-organization, and Frederick Laloux's book about reinventing the organization with purpose and self-management, they can't operate on a framework, a worldview of it's a machine. We need to shift the paradigm. We need to go from a machine thinking to a living organization, which releases the ability to now implement all those beautiful ideas. Well, you're describing the two worldviews. You're describing a worldview of rational, logical, Newtonian, the world's a clock and all we have to do is figure out how to adjust the component parts. And a worldview that is in relationship with the world. A worldview that listens from the heart, not just the head. Can you bring them back together? I hope so, because that's what the Living Organization tries to do. One of the key skills we teach to our clients, and at the core of everything we do, besides the notion of energy, which I talked about, is the fact that you've got to learn how to lead from the head and the heart together. If you can't do that, then you have one view, heart, nature, relationship, and another view. Our point, our whole work is to bring those together. Balance has always been a key word in my life. Well, one of the things I discovered years ago, even before I started to write the Living Organization, recognizing that trying to explain my ideas to people, when I saw the world very differently than they did, or not completely differently, but enough difference. And I tried to explain what I saw, and a lot of times I realized I was talking a foreign language. And that's when I began to realize people see the world through their own lens. And an example I've often used is, imagine trying to explain skiing to somebody who grew up in the Sahara Desert. They wouldn't even know what snow was, let alone skiing down a hill of snow. They couldn't even understand the concept. There's a story that goes back to when the Europeans came to America. And they did not see the ship, the Native Americans did not see the ship in the harbor. Why? We're told because they didn't have a concept of a ship, so they couldn't see it. I bought a new car recently, and it's a red Hyundai. Do you know how many red cars I've seen lately? Just because my filter system is open to it. But before that, just like the Indians, I didn't see those cars on the road. They just magically appeared, right? Because my filter system was different. So that's why it's so difficult. And that's really why we have to listen from the heart. Because I have to be able to open up my filter system. And my head cannot do that. My heart can do that. The approach I've taken working with leaders is the recognition that first and foremost, I have to recognize what the number one responsibility is, which is they have to create the results necessary to maintain a sustained growth of the organization over time. So the first thing I have to do before I can ask anything of them is I have to see that as my priority. If I'm going to help them, I have to help them with what they're commissioned to do. Once that happens, they are then feel safe to look at other ways of thinking. Until that happens, they are just going to, yes, nice, but I got to get back to business. But when they recognize that what I'm suggesting to them is about getting back to business, and it will get them better results, as if by magic, less effort, more outcome. Now I've got their attention. Now I can start training them on some of those skills, like opening up the heart and the mind. And I work with them to do that. I train them on that, and then we work with them to do that. We give them the tools necessary to think in terms of their organization as a living person. We give them the tools to think in terms of activity, relationship, and context. And the tools we give them are really tools they're already familiar with, like doing a SWOT analysis. doing a needs assessment of the customers. But let's do it from the perspective of not optimizing a machine, but let's do it from the perspective of this is a living being. Let's do a SWOT analysis that incorporates activity, relationship, and context, not just the activity that we have to optimize. Let's do a needs assessment for our customers, not as a what can I give them and what can I get from them, but as a relationship in an ecosystem where we're codependent with each other. So we give them the tools and shift their mindset at the same time. As I said, the number one responsibility is, you might just simply say, improving the bottom line. And of course, that's our focus always. But what they tell me is the benefit is that people are more engaged, which helps them improve the bottom line. The people are taking on more of what I like to call an owner's mindset. They're actually making contribution, which relieves the CEO from having to be involved in all and every decision. The CEOs feel relieved. I'll tell you a little story. I have one client. He actually had to stop working with me for a while because he developed cancer. And he was going through chemotherapy. Thank God he's just fine. But he had to back away from running the company. And when I spoke to him just a couple of weeks ago, he said to me, you know, Norman, my team was able to step up and run the company without me. And I mean, you can imagine being a leader or an owner of a company to have a team of people who can do that. And those are the kinds of things they tell me. When you spoke about, resonance earlier, and I went to see the film about the Kogis that you were sharing, even though I didn't speak French. I was moved by the movie because it goes back to the question you asked earlier about how can we get the Western world and the indigenous world together. At the core of my work is to achieve that merger, that coming together. We live in a world of opposites today. And one of my mentors and teachers taught me the concept of we reach peace when we make opposites like this into complements like this. Tomorrow when you're going to show the film again, and when I give at the conference, I am going to tie the living organization to that film, that need to bring the Western scientists and the indigenous wisdom together. We live on a planet that only through the eliminated of the bifurcation we experience in so many ways, only when we can bring opposites back into complements, when the coin is no longer just a head or a tail, but it becomes a whole coin, then we can make progress against the many, many challenges we face in our society. But it's a journey, and it's a journey of preparing people for that. It's a journey where the opposing right and left in politics has to come together from this to this, where I can listen to you, even though you have a totally different point of view, and I can see at least a little bit of wisdom of what you're sharing with me. At the core of the living organization is not just to transform businesses, it's really to transform the world, to help individuals become CEOs of their own life, not just employees, to help them mature so they can be in relationship with varying different points of view and find the best solution for the collective, not just the collective. I look at a collective as one of those Russian nested dolls. So the individual comes together in a marriage. The marriage grows into a family. That's a new collective, a living entity called the family. The family lives in a town. The town is a collective. We got to work for the welfare of the town. The town lives in the state lives in the country lives in the planet. And when we can all work together for the welfare of the collective above us, now we've got, I talked about that separation of individual versus collective. That's what we're facing, is this bifurcation. When we bring that together, now we've got the possibility of living in harmony, taking wisdom from places we never normally think about, accepting rather than rejecting. That's been my calling, and the Living Organization is my vehicle to help that come about.